Hi, folks. My name is Girish Bally, the host for Back to Basics and other Back to Basics Friend of the Week for Season 3. Today, we're going to speak with Howard KAPLAN. Howard KAPLAN is an author, not a normal author, a really popular author. His first book, or one of his books, became a movie. A Damascus cover is the movie. And we're going to go and find out what that book is all about. What is that movie all about? How did it become a movie? And then he just came up with the second one. And we're going to talk about that too. So let's discuss with Howard as to how he's doing and what is he doing and what's his future plans when it comes to Back to Basics. So I'll see you there. Take care. Hi, folks. My name is Girish Bally, the host for Back to Basics. And I said that earlier in my intro. Today, we're going to talk to Howard KAPLAN. Yes, Howard KAPLAN is in the house in Back to Basics, and we're going to talk to him about his book, how it made into a movie, what was the process of it. Maybe he was not part of that process. Maybe he was. You would never know till you ask that question. But there's one thing that I do want to know. Is spy real? Or is it just one of those fake things that you just read in the books and James Bond and all that fun stuff? So why don't we get into the details of that and how and why and what made him create this book and what made this movie too? Howard, how are you? And thanks for coming to Back to Basics.
My pleasure. Wonderful to be here from my home office.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you again for that, and very excited, Howard, and very honored. Thank you again for coming here. But before we get into the spy business and your book business and everything else that you do, what does Back to Basic mean to you?
You know, not a lot of my life was planned.
Okay.
My father wanted to be a lawyer. He continued until he was 96, wishing that I would have given him that security. Unexpectedly, when I was 20 years old and a college student, I found myself in Damascus, Syria, and then followed there by the secret police. And I was actually only in the country for a few hours, but it sparked my interest. I wrote a novel. I was in my 20s that was published when I was 27 called The Damascus Cover, which you referred to. It was the one that was filmed. It took a little while. It took 40 years for the film to get made, but it was made with big stars and we're happy to wait. And I had a long career as a writer of other novels, novels of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And I met a man named Brooks Newmark, who's a member of British Parliament. I met him actually on Facebook, and then he came to Los Angeles, and we became friends. And he said, in your words, it's time to go back to basics. It's time to go back to Syria because of the Syrian civil war.
Yeah.
Now, he didn't mean physically go back, although he is gone, but he meant it's time to write a novel now about what's happening in Syria, in the Syrian civil war. And that's my new book, The Syrian Sunsets. I went back to basics. Maybe I should show you something if I can't. It's actually out of the screen. In 1977, I wrote the Syrian travel ministry, and they sent me this wonderful street map of Damascus. And I found I could still use it 40 years later as the streets hadn't gone anywhere. So that's basically what it means to me, to go back to where I started my writing career in trying to do something important and try to illuminate the situation of what happened to 500,000 Syrian people who died as a result of the civil war.
Wow. Howard, thank you. Thank you again for answering that question. Thank you again for being here. Very excited. But before we get into, the whole detail of this whole book and before we dissect this, You know, at the age 20 or age 19 or 15, we do something else besides writing books that serious into that realm. I mean, what really made you get into that realm when you started this book?
Um, my mother had been a concentration camp survivor. She was a Hungarian Jew. She was taken into Auschwitz at 16, along with her 4 sisters. And immediately upon arrival, her mother and youngest sister were sent to gas chambers. So I think I had a feeling growing up, even as a teenager, that not enough was done to help people in great need around the globe, whatever the reason. So I felt I couldn't sit silent. Even, I shouldn't say even before, a few months after I was in Syria, I was in the Soviet Union. I helped smuggle a roll of microfilm out. I went back to the Soviet Union a year later and was arrested in the Ukraine, funny enough, where all this battle is going on now. I was arrested in Kharkov, which was the Soviet name for Kharkiv. So they too are going back to basics, meaning the Russians took over Ukraine and changed the names of the cities. Kharkiv became Kharkov. Kiev became Kiev. So the Ukrainians have gone back and reinstituted their original names of Kharkiv. So I felt they were things I wanted to illuminate. And I had this idea, however, that suspense novels, thrillers, could reach the largest number of people, more than a history book. And so I began on that course.
Thank you again, Howard, for that. I mean, the reason why I asked this question, you know, it sounds like from what I'm understanding here and what I've read about you and known about you from other resources, it seems like it's more of a journal that you wrote versus a book title. Is that correct?
No, I tried to write a journal. It's funny, you're correct, but you're a little bit ahead.
Okay.
I wrote a journal about my experiences in Russia. And I got an agent and I tried to publish it as a novel. And one editor at a major publishing house said, "This sounds like a journal. Could we publish it as a journal?" And he wanted to do it, but he couldn't get enough support within the publishing house. Usually it takes 3 senior editors to agree, and they didn't. So I put that aside and I wrote the Damascus cover, which really is a spy novel in the realm of John le Carré or Clive Cussler or Patterson or anybody of that genre. And about 2/3 of the way through, to my surprise, I thought of a twist for the end that I hadn't planned. And people are very happy about this. About nobody has ever guessed the novelistic twist at the end of the story. So it's worked out very well. As I said, 40 years later, it became a motion picture with Sir John Hurt, British actor from Elephant Man, who was his final picture, and Jonathan Rhys Meyers, who all the women seem to like.
Thank you again, Howard, for that. You know, did you ever think that your book was going to be featured as a movie or a show or what have you?
You
I
know,
mean, you just wrote this as a book, as a
I wrote it as a novel
yeah.
in the 70s. Some big agents looked at it. They sent it around. One producer called me and said, "I don't want to do the book, but would you come and work for me?" So I made a mistake. I said no. I was writing another novel and I was a little full of myself. I should have gone to work for him. He was a major producer. And then the project was dead. In fact, even the book was dead. The book went out of print for longer than 20 years. And then it was a fluke. It didn't get made through any of the traditional Hollywood ways. A movie director was looking to make a film of the Middle East. And he asked a friend, do you know any really good books? She said, well, you know, I have this Howard KAPLAN book on my shelf. Let me pull it down and why don't you read it? He read it. The next day called me. She had my number. Said, will you meet me at Pete's Coffee in Beverly Hills? And he said, I want to do the movie and here's the people. We didn't have agents. We didn't have lawyers. We didn't have anything. And I thought, for 20 years, the book's been dead. I'll sign. And I didn't even read it that carefully. I just had faith that if somebody really wanted to do it, he might get it made. And, you know, all my lawyer friends and everybody thought I was crazy. But I signed it right on the spot in Pete's Coffee. It took him 10 years to raise the funds. Making a movie is all about money, meaning if you have enough money, you can hire anybody. They work for their scale. And sometimes if they like the project, they will cut their rate, you know, for an independent or a smaller film.
Sure, sure.
And
Yeah, but
suddenly he called me up and he said, we have the money, we have the actors, we're going to Casablanca, you want to come?
But the thing is that with this whole process, we're not even talking about the money part. We're just talking about the creativity part and the storytelling. Were you part of that whole process as to it doesn't get really demolished from versus a movie and a book?
Yes and no. Meaning this director who I met, he bought the rights and he wrote the screenplay. I wasn't really part of that. However, once the film was shot, he had some difficulties in the editing. And he had some uncertainties about how the story came together, some of the changes he'd made. And he called me up and he said, would you look at the first draft of the edited film? And I ended up becoming very involved in helping him edit. I even had a girlfriend at the time who was a film editor. It was kind of, you know, serendipitous. And I was very involved in that process. And then he started calling me every day. So we became closer. But I wasn't involved in the initial writing of the film or the initial shooting.
Yeah, thank you again for that. But where did you come up with this title, Damascus, and what does that mean, if you don't mind?
Well, so here's the real truth. I didn't make up the title. I had a title that was called A Sordid Affair. S-O-R-D-I-D. I got an agent in New York. He sold the book to Dutton in a week. They had 3 readings. They liked it very much and they bought it. They asked for some rewrites. I thought the rewrites were very smart rather than, and they were major, some of them. Like, for example, he said throughout the first 100 pages, I had the characters starting in Damascus. He said, why don't you start them in Jerusalem? And the way he laid it out, he sent me a 3-page letter, single space. And I was mature enough to say to myself, even in my 20s, what he is suggesting is better than what I have. So I'm going to do it. And I spent, I think, 3 months full-time rewriting it. Then he came out to Los Angeles, where I live. He was in New York. He was staying at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel, where Pretty Woman was filmed. And I went up to his room and he was on the phone, you know, typical wheeler dealer. He hands me a manila envelope. I take it out and there's the cover of the hardcover with a new title, the Damascus cover. They had changed it, which actually they probably had to have my permission to do, but it seemed like a better title. And the artwork on the hardcover was very good. It still can be found on the Amazon page. They had an Israeli flag inside, the muzzle of a gun, and a man and woman entwined around the gun. And suddenly my book became the Damascus cover, and I think it meant the spy who went undercover in Damascus. And so I'm pretty used to the title after 40 years.
Yeah, thank you again for explaining the whole process of that. Are you happy with the way the movie came out, from your thought, from your vision to today's, I guess, a movie?
I'm 75% happy.
Okay.
And I suppose in the real world of creativity, that's not bad. I like the film. They did a few things to try to update it. Some were okay. Instead of setting it in the 70s, one thing was good. They set it in 1989, in the year of the Berlin Wall coming down, to use that metaphor of freedom and the Berlin Wall. In the novel, there are a number of children being smuggled out of Damascus. They wanted to update it to a Syrian chemical engineer. They did update it. I didn't like that. And I thought it was forced, an attempt to be commercial. You know, chemical weapons are a big thing. And I think some of the passion that this spy was being used a little bit by his own people to smuggle out these children, but there was a second message underneath, which is the twist. I think it was better that way, the way I had it in the novel. Now, the irony is the new novel, The Syrian Sunset, is entirely about chemical weapons in Syria and how Putin and Obama, it's a historical novel, made a deal. Well, let me back up a little bit. I'm a little ahead of myself. Obama at one point said publicly, if Assad of Syria uses chemical weapons, this is a red line that he will cross, and we're not going to stand for it. A year later, Assad used chemical weapons while the UN inspectors were holding up in the Sheraton Hotel in Damascus, in reality, trying to get into the sites of chemical weapons use. And they murdered 1,000 rebels in East Damascus. Obama then was a year before, he'd said, if there's a red line, I'm going to do something. But he didn't. He instead, why didn't he? I think the real reason was the war in Iraq. The war in Iraq had been such a disaster for everybody. There was no will anywhere on the planet, not with Angela Merkel in Germany, or with David Cameron, the Prime Minister of Britain, to back Obama to challenge Assad, who had then murdered 1,000 people. That's really crossing a red line. What happened then was Putin, there was a G20 meeting in St. Petersburg, and this is a historical novel, so all these events appear in the Syrian Sunset. And Obama and Putin agreed for Putin to pressure Syria to remove all their chemical weapons in exchange for the Americans not striking. And that deal was actually cooked in St. Petersburg. And the Russians forced the Syrians to give up their chemical weapons. But I ask you, and this is the kind of question I ask in my work, they left all the barrel bomb capability. So what they did was got rid of the chemical weapons, but allowed Assad to continue murdering with conventional barrel bombs, which are fertilizer bombs, the kind that Timothy McVeigh used to blow up the FBI building in Oklahoma City, when that whole building was destroyed. So I ask you, if you have family and they're murdered, does it matter if it's chemical gas or a barrel bomb that blows up their apartment building? In the end, they're still gone. And the West backed down and allowed Putin to run wild in Syria. He already had a naval base at Latakia on the Mediterranean. He built huge Air Force bases, and he bombed the Syrian Free Army while he claimed he was bombing ISIS. So Putin hoodwinked everyone. And I believe, and the thesis of the novel is, it is a novel, is that if we would have stood up to Putin and Assad in Syria, he might not have been emboldened to go into Ukraine. Because even now, he is calling Russian troops from Syria who have street fighting experience into Ukraine to fight the free Ukrainians. So that's really what that novel is about. It's brand new, so it's not yet a movie.
But do you think that it will be a movie? Because now you're talking more.
I think we're starting to talk to people.
Okay.
I think that the fact that my Back to Basics first novel from 40 years ago was filmed with some substantial actors gives the new story a little bit more hope. You know, people will talk to me and people who are representing me a little bit more because a film was already made. So these are all great surprises. The only thing I can do is sit alone and try and write the best book I can.
Of course.
You know, day after day. On occasion, I've been asked by all kinds of people, what's your inspiration? And I said, it's not really inspiration, it's perspiration. A writer gets up every day like a journeyman, like anybody else who goes to work. Only maybe he doesn't have to go so far. I just walk across the house. And I don't take time off. When I first started writing, every friend who had a vacation started calling me. Let's go to breakfast. You know, you don't do anything. And I said, I learned to say no. I learned to say, this is my work time. I can meet you at 4 o'clock when I'm done.
Yeah, Howard, thank you. Thank you again for explaining both books and how that transition happened and it's going on. So thank you all for that. But before we end the call today and recording today, there's a rapid fire that we just started a new segment for season 3 for Back to Basics. And are you ready for that? Because there's like words and sentences.
Generally pretty good on my feet, so give me a try.
Okay. Well, the first word is going to be called prisoner.
Family. I think of my family who were imprisoned under the Nazis.
Journal.
Journal?
Yes.
Daily.
Storytelling.
Truth.
Damascus cover.
Lucky boy.
Spies.
Real.
Human trafficking.
Tragic.
Red line.
Failure.
Chemical weapons. War.
Necessary.
Murder.
Not necessary.
Bombing.
Sad.
Back to basics.
Return where you started. Strengthened.
And the last one is Howard.
Content.
Howard, thank you again for playing the rapid fire for Back to Basics for season 3. I really enjoyed chatting with you, understanding the psychoanalysis as to how you created this book and why you created this book. And thank you again for creating that masterpiece. And the movie just came out, obviously, in I think 2017 or 18. Is that correct?
Right. It moves around. It was on Hulu for a while. It was on Stars. And most recently, it's on a channel called Tubi, which are one of the new free channels with commercials. So it's available to everybody to stream on computer or television. You just have to tolerate the commercials. It's Tubi, Tubi.
Yeah. I will definitely watch this before, right before this airs. So thank you again for Howard for being here. But before you leave, do you have any last words for all my Back to Basic listeners and my viewers? And how is your journey on Back to Basics too? On top of that,
I suppose I would say nothing in my life really went easily, but it always went. So if we're back to single words, I would say persevere. You know, both with books and films and relationships and family.
yeah, Howard, thank you again for being here, and thank you again for supporting me on the small podcast that I have. And we'll be in touch for sure, and we'll get together for Howard 3.0 version, because this is the second version that I've connected with you, and hopefully you'll come back again.
Be my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So guys, we spoke with Howard today, and we found out that, well, it's a definitely tough life that he has gone through, what he has observed, and he's created this book. And he created this book almost 20, 40 years ago. And here we are with a movie. Now the key is, does the movie do justice or the book? That's up to you to decide and judge. But there's one thing that I did observe, is that create something observing from your eyes and write it down. You never know. People might like it. Now, as usual, as always, there's a quote of the day from Back to Basics, and hopefully my guest Howard will like the quote. The quote is, "Spies go undercover. They take on different personas." They do, don't they? Because that's what spies do. They have an interesting life or a horrible life. That's up to you to decide. But guys, as usual, as always, what do I always say at the end of the episode? Everything in life goes back to basics, and that's what we did today, guys. Guys, take care, God bless, and I'll see you next time on Back to Basics. Hi guys, thank you again for tuning in to Back to Basics and listening to the excellent episode that we had today with our guest. With your love and support, we do need you to at least rate our show, review our show, because it does make us stronger day by day, week by week, as I usually say on my episodes. And there are 3 things in this episode that it makes a hit for me, which is the content, the guest, and definitely the host. So guys, take care, God bless, and remember, everything in life goes back to basics, and that's what we did today, guys. Guys, take care, God bless, and see you next time on Back to Basics.